All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming or for viewing at home. My name is Kyra Durant. I am the coordinator of instructional technology for CUHSD. I was in the classroom up until December of this past year. So I have some experience with the remote teaching with the distance learning that we were doing. And I am now here to support everyone in the transition back to whatever is going to come next. So these EdTech Toolkit tutorials are all about diving into quick overviews or learning strategies. I try to always choose ones that I have used in my classroom and that I found successful. And I also try to make sure that they are things that can be applicable across content areas and grade levels. So today we're going to be looking at 4 powerful tools for long-term learning. I really like this one for the end of the year, but not totally the end of the year because I know that we're not there yet. But these are some strategies that you can start using like tomorrow and then throughout the rest of the school year as really quick, very low prep, no grading, getting your students ready for the end of the year and for finals instead of that sort of feeling so overwhelming at the end. So the slides are in the chat, and then for those of you watching the recording, the slides will be with this recording, and there's also a bit.ly link on the screen. So again, my name is Kyra Durant. I'm the coordinator of instructional technology. You can find me at kduran@cuhsd.org. I have office hours every Wednesday from 9 to 10 a.m. And then I do these EdTech Toolkit tutorials every Wednesday afternoon from 1 to 1:30. A couple tips for this session. So ideally, you want to have 2 windows open. If you're watching the recording, it would be this recording or the live Zoom. And then these slides, it's nice to have the slides open because I'm going to change this really quick. Because the sticker on the slide, there's resources in the slides that you can click on. And all the links and resources are not actually on the last slide yet. I need to go back and do that. The other thing is the goal is never for you to take every single thing and use it all and feel like you have to do these things. The goal is just for you to get one thing, one thing that you feel is useful. Even if it's the smallest of things, I usually find those are the game changers. So our goal for today is to leave feeling like you can incorporate one of the power tools into your teaching tomorrow. Another thing that I am a huge fan of is not trying to invent new things or start anything from scratch. This is all adapted from the science of learning and the 2 women who wrote this book, Powerful Teaching. And they have an incredible website. I will put it in the chat, and it's also linked in the slides at retrievalpractice.org. And they have done years and years of research and come up with these strategies. And I have a feeling we're going to go through this and be like, Kyra, like, duh, I already know how to do, like, these things are not rocket science. And that's the point, is that powerful learning can happen from very simple strategies that are very easy to use. So the power tools that we're going to be talking about today, there's 4 of them: retrieval practice, spacing, interleaving, and feedback-driven metacognition. We'll mostly dig into the retrieval practice. That's kind of the what, and the spacing, the interleaving, and the metacognition are kind of like the framework, that like the how part of it, rather than the actual things that you would do in your classroom. There's several whys. These are my favorites. These tools are research-based and confirmed. They are flexible for all content areas. They require minimal prep, no grading, and take very little time. They're my favorite to use for warm-ups and exit tickets. So at retrievalpractice.org, and the whole idea behind these powerful learning tools is that as educators, we tend to focus a lot on getting information into our students. And these strategies are all about getting information out of our students. So really focusing on building in time during every single class period to make sure that our students are able to go back and reflect on their own learning and show what they know to themselves, mostly just to themselves, to their classmates, and also to the teacher. So the first power tool, and again, this is the one that is like my favorite, is called retrieval practice. Retrieval practice is about pulling information out of students' heads rather than putting information in, which we spend a lot of our class time doing already. It's about bringing information to mind. It boosts fact knowledge and complex learning. So there's all different kinds of ways to do retrieval practice, but you want to make sure that it's kind of mirroring whatever your assessment is going to be. So if you're doing assessment that is on basic content and knowledge and complex learning, then you want to have your retrieval practice mimic both of those things. And it also, research has shown that it can be very transformative for long-term learning. So how do we do it? There are several ways to do retrieval practice. These are 4 of the ones that I have used. If you really want to dig into retrieval practice, it's all at retrievalpractice.org, which is linked on this slide, or this powerful teaching. This is not right. See, I knew I didn't have these quite right. Retrievalpractice.org. This is my favorite resource. Weekly teaching tips. I'm going to put it in the chat right now, and I'll make sure that the slides are linked correctly as well. Let me put this. There we go. So retrieval, my favorite of all of these is the brain dump. And it was my student's favorite. It's so easy. It's so powerful. It's a great way to start class. It's a great way to end class. And all it is having students write down everything they can remember about a topic. So you give them a topic and you ask them to write down everything they can remember. It's really helpful to have a timer going. So I'd say, like, I usually did about 3 minutes. And then sometimes if I felt like they were struggling or like had kind of hit a point where I couldn't see a lot of things happening, I would sometimes add some guiding questions about the topic. So maybe I'd say something like, I taught AP government, write down everything you can remember about federalism. And then if I was like, maybe they need a little bit more help with that, I might have some more guiding questions, but very general, like, what is it? Why does it matter? What are some features of federalism? Draw a picture, draw a diagram. So instead of giving them ideas, I would kind of guide, like, what are some other questions they could think about as they're trying to figure out what federalism is. I might say something like, we learned about this last week, or we learned about this in the past unit, and to kind of give them a time frame in case they're like, did I miss something that we learned 5 minutes ago or like yesterday? So it kind of helps them realize, like, oh, this isn't something that I learned recently. I need to kind of dig back in my memory. There's no wrong answers in the brain dump. it's everything that they can remember or think they know. And I'll talk a little bit more about brain dumps in just a second. The second strategy for retrieval practice that I really like is low or no stakes quizzes. So the purpose of these quizzes is learning, and so they're much more effective if they're not graded. If you're concerned about participation, I would just make it like super minimal part of a grade or some kind of like, you know, participation or something like that, but very, very minimal. The third is just your good old think, pair, share. In the remote world, I used the chat a lot for this one, so I didn't have to spend a lot of time putting students into breakout rooms. And then the fourth one was flashcards, either paper or digital. The key with the flashcards is to practice often and to change up the order. And I'm going to talk about each of these in a little bit more detail, and I'll show you some examples of how I did them in my classroom. So the brain dump is actually, I'm going to show this short video. So this is one of the researchers who wrote the book Powerful Learning, and this is her talking about the brain dump again, which is my favorite strategy.
I would, I guess one of my favorite examples is what I call, or there are lots of names that you could use, but I call them brain dumps. So to ask students to, again, close their books, make sure they don't have notes. I've done research on open book versus closed book types of retrieval. To close their notes and to just write down everything they can remember, or even write down 2 things they can remember. And then either open the book back up, check and see how they did, give themselves feedback, or as teachers to give some classroom discussion or think, pair, share. But that act of kind of dumping out things from your brain helps emphasize that retrieval is a learning strategy, that dumping of things out of your brain is not an assessment. And on top of that, brain dumps also provide formative assessment in addition to retrieval, because then as instructors and teachers, we know how our students are doing, but we also know that that's a good learning strategy. And actually a lot of laboratory research, including the one you mentioned by Jeff Karpicki and Janelle Blunt, does exactly that. Students read passages and then they literally write down everything they can remember. And so we know from laboratory research, from K-12 research I've done with a collaborator of mine, Patrice Spain in Illinois, that simply writing down what you can remember or 1 or 2 things, and then, well, just doing that can help. And then providing that feedback, if you have class time, it can be as simple as 1 minute, or think, pair, share, can really help student learning. So I like that. It's simple. It takes less than 1 minute.
So there are several ways to do a brain dump. When we were fully in person, I would just have students open a notebook or a piece of scratch paper. And actually, I'll take that back because I also did this in distance learning as well. Just have them get a piece of scratch paper from like literally anywhere in their house, wherever they were, and something to write with. I told them if they didn't have scratch paper, they could open up just a blank like Google Doc, and I'd have them write and draw everything they remember. Sometimes I'd have them take a picture of it, or when we were done, I would ask, and I wouldn't always get them to say yes, but I would ask them to hold it up in front of their camera. They didn't have to show their face so I could see them. But I do think there's some really helpful digital tools for doing brain dumps. The first is Jamboard. And if you're on these slides, if you click on this Jamboard link right here, it will actually take you to a Jamboard template. If you're not familiar with Jamboard, I did an EdTech Toolkit tutorial on it a few weeks ago. It's basically just a digital whiteboard. It's just like a blank screen. But if you go to that link and you scroll down to, you have to scroll down to number 12, it has a sticky note brain dump and a button to get this template. And you can just share that template with your students. And then all they need to do is add sticky notes, and you can see all of their Jamboards you can see them live. You can have them in groups on the same Jamboard. So you could do a team brain dump that way. There's lots of different ways to use Jamboard. And if you want to learn more about Jamboard, this site that you're on right now, if you clicked on that link, Ditch That Textbook, he is like the king of the Jamboard. He has like everything you could ever want to know about Jamboard. And so if you're interested in that, just let me know. I can point you towards more resources. The second tech tool that I really like for doing brain dumps is Flipgrid. These would be oral brain dumps, but students can also share their screen or show a picture. So students could do a brain dump on paper, show their paper in their video, and read it off. That's also a nice way for students to share each other's brain dumps across, because they can watch each other's videos. If you click that link, it will take you to a blog post, again, from Ditch That Textbook, about how to use Flipgrid and Socrative for brain dumps. So there's directions for both of those right here on this resource if you want to try either of those. So this one has how to use Flipgrid with all the directions, and also how to use Socrative. I think that I tried it. I just used the free version of this. There's a paid version, but I didn't even mess with that, because if you just do one question, you don't need to pay for it. And then of course you can have them do it on paper. Don't play again, please. The next kind of like tech tools for retrieval practice is low stakes quizzes. There are like so many online quizzes, and I'm sure you have your favorite. My personal favorite was Quiziz. A strategy that I used that I really liked was every single Thursday we started class with a Quiziz. I like Quiziz because I was just used to it. I knew how to use it. My students knew how to use it because we'd gotten in the habit. I also like Quiziz because you can search for pre-made quizzes, but you can do that with all of these tools. With Kahoot, with Blookit, with Gimkit, all of these have banks where you can look for pre-made quizzes. I definitely recommend starting there instead of starting from scratch. I do not like starting things from scratch. You can find quizzes that already exist and edit them so that they make more sense for you and what you're teaching. They can be really short. It's better if they're short, and again, low stakes, and making it really clear to students that this is about learning, not necessarily about assessment. And the other thing that I really liked about quizzes is their asynchronous feature. So I'll show you what that looks like. This is actually a quiz on retrieval practice, but and I just searched for it in Quizzes, but if you go to start a live quiz and click on classic, continue with Google. You can share a link directly with your students, and they can do the quiz on their own, like during class, but on their own. You don't have to skip through the questions for them. So that means students are doing this quiz, and I would use that time to like take attendance, take a breath, like get myself settled, make sure I had everything ready. And so I really liked starting that. And it was a routine that we established, like every Thursday was Quizzes Thursday, and they would start class with a 10-question quiz. The other thing I really like about Quizzes is that once you get to the results, it shows you which questions were frequently missed. So you can go through those and do reteaching right there on the spot, targeted reteaching right on the spot. and students don't have to create an account or anything like that. I will say though that I think all of these options, quizzes, Kahoot, Blookit, Gimkit, they all have features like that. So it's really just about finding one that you like, or maybe if you have course-like team teachers, asking them if they're using online quizzes, because you can often share quizzes as well. The next one is flashcards. Quizlet is my favorite digital tool for flashcards. I ended up getting the paid version, and I just contacted my principal and my principal's secretary, and I said, "This is how I'm using Quizlet. This is how it's helping my students. Can I get reimbursed for the subscription?" And I was able to get reimbursed. So it's always worth asking. The monthly subscription isn't very expensive. Um, you can make Quizlet sets on Quizlet. Students can make their own. And then the one thing that is really nice about Quizlet is that as you can search for sets that are already created. And then you always have them. So yeah, for sure, Kathy. That Quizlet can also, you can just go back and have students practice Quizlet sets from previous units. The paid version also has a game called Quizlet Live, and the paid version also allows you to put in images in there as well. It's not necessary, but I used it so much it ended up being a tool that was worth it for me to invest in. This resource right here will take you to a website that talks about how to make flashcards more powerful. And I just shared all this information directly with my students. And I was like, this is a learning tool. And this is how you can transform your flashcards into just being like random flashcards into really powerful learning tools. I'm going to pause for a second and just say again, this is not the kind of thing where like I would expect anybody to go out and be like, I'm going to do all of these things in my classroom tomorrow. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by any of this, just again, I would just start with maybe one thing, like trying having your students do a brain dump, and not trying to do everything all at once, especially at this point. Power tool number 2. So that was all about retrieval practice. The rest of them are not going to be that intense. Power tool number 2 is spacing. So this is more about like how you would actually use those retrieval practice strategies. So I had kind of had my favorites, right? I had my quizzes that I really liked. I had my brain dumps that I really liked, and I had my Quizlet sets. And I would kind of go through those, cycle through those as a warm up every class. And I started out telling my students like, this is retrieval practice. This is how we learn better. I showed them some of the research, reminded them of it. I also said all the time that forgetting is a really important part of learning because they're always so hard on themselves. Like, I can't remember anything. I can't remember this, that. I'm like, that's a super powerful part of learning is you forget it. And then when you remember it, you're building that learning more and more. And that I didn't make that up. That actually comes from a lot of their research as well. So reminding students like it's good to forget, and we're spending these 5 minutes at the beginning of class remembering these things to make more powerful learning. So spacing is just about not trying to cram all these things into one day. So it's not a day of review for an assessment, but if you can continually be using these retrieval practices every day for short amounts of time at the beginning, at the end, in the middle, it is really helpful for students rather than trying to cram a lot of remembering into 1 or 2 class periods. It's also about retrieving previous content. So again, getting information out rather than putting it in, asking questions like, what did you learn yesterday? Or what do you remember from last class? Again, reminding students that forgetting is a good thing, and then modeling that in the classroom. So really explicitly making time every day for remembering, for that retrieval, for reviewing. There's that. I think that one of the best things about this is that it sets a routine. It buys you some time, especially at first, like students will be like, brain jump, like, why are you talking about that? That's a silly sounding thing. But eventually they start to get in the habit, and it starts to then start class with something that they're familiar with, and it can buy you a little bit of time at the beginning of class too. It doesn't take very long. And again, ultimately, all of these things are promoting long-term learning. If you want to dig in more to spacing in particular and the research, I linked there the spacing guide from the researchers. It's about 4 or 5 pages. So that's just something to look at if this is something that's really interesting to you or you want to dive deeper into the research. That guide is there. Power tool number 3 is called interleaving, which is basically about almost like muscle confusion for the brain. So pulling back from things that you may have done in a previous unit or a previous month, and mixing up the content. And again, it's really goes back to this idea of revisiting previous ideas for students rather than just sort of like plowing through content straight ahead without ever pausing to look back at what you had done before. Um, I don't know if any of you are math teachers, but they actually have a ton of research about this, particularly for math. There is a guide that I don't have here for some reason. Let me see if I can get it in here really quick. Interleaving. So their interleaving guide is specifically uses a math concept or a math class, but is applicable to all content areas. And I'll make sure that's linked in the slides. I also just put it in the chat. My favorite thing about the idea of interleaving is that you can reuse things you've already done. So if you had a quizzes that you made, right now, and then revisiting it again in May, and students are like, wait a minute, like I've seen this before, and they start to feel some of that remembering and some of that learning as well. It also works really nice with something like Quizlet, where you can have them go back and practice a previous set of cards, and then you're not creating more content, but reusing things that you've already done. Power tool number 4 is feedback-driven metacognition, and this is kind of twofold. The biggest thing is allowing students opportunities to reflect on their own learning. And again, kind of goes back to this idea that like forgetting and making errors is a good thing. And that learning is a process. It's not something that happens in just one moment and then we move on, which is oftentimes how learning works, especially when we're trying to get through a ton of content. And so building in places for students to reflect on their learning, like I used to think blank, but now I know blank. And these make really good exit tickets at the end of the day. Even just asking your students, what's one thing you learned today? What's one thing that you didn't know before that you know now? Asking questions like how are you gonna how will you remember this thing that you learned today? Things like that. And they're very open-ended. They tend to especially as students get used to the routine. Again, I'm really big into routines, having that like those bookends on your lesson, like the warm up and the exit ticket. Students start to get used to it. and it provides familiarity with just the way that classes go as well. In the how, there's a link here that will take you to a blog post called 4 end of semester retrieval activities that are no prep and no grading. And it's not just no grading to make them easy, it's intentionally no grading because this is not about assessment, it's about learning. And again, making that really clear to students can be helpful. And all these end of semester retrieval activities are all about just giving students an opportunity to reflect on their learning. Other nice ways to do this would be just a quick Canvas discussion. So opening up a discussion at the end of every class in Canvas with an open-ended question. I like to give my students like 3 or 4 options of questions that they can, open-ended questions they can answer. You could use something like Pear Deck or Nearpod as well. At the end of every lesson, having an open-ended reflection question. There's also their metacognition guide here if that's something you want to dig into a little bit deeper and check out the research. So those are the 4 tools. I have a feedback form that I'm going to put in the chat, which hopefully is updated. If you get a chance to fill it out, that would be great. It helps me plan forward and make sure that there's content that's relevant and helpful. I'm going to go back through these slides. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can I? Okay, so what would you do? What is your strategy when you see a student that consistently, you don't grade these quizzes, but you see that they get 10% correct on the answers and they keep doing that continuously? Mm-hmm. Because the sort of the students who don't get into the concept of we're not grading this, but it's practice, is fun. Well, it's visually interesting, mm-hmm. and let's use this tool, and they just don't.
That's a great question, and I think there's a couple ways that I would approach that. One, I think that's a great opportunity to like have a conference with that student and just be like, just to find like what's going on. Like, how are you doing? I think that just having those kinds of conversations with a student like that is often really eye-opening. And sometimes you find out like, oh, you're just really, this is just not at all your thing, or you don't care. And then sometimes I've had students in the past who have been like, Mr. Rand, I never want to do the quizzes because I'm afraid that everybody's going to be able to see that I don't know the answer. And I was like, oh, I had never said out loud, like, I'm the only one who can see how you're doing on these. She was under the impression that like everybody could see her quiz results, which wasn't the case. So that gave me the opportunity to just like clear up that misconception.
Okay.
So I think that's a good one. I also just think I often will like reach out to that student's other teachers and ask like, how are you having the same experience with this student? And then have you had any success? Like, and what has that looked like for you having, trying to work with this student? And then I just also think that oftentimes the consistency of it really does start to pay off over time, where students realize like, I can't just ignore this thing we're doing today because we're never going to do it again. Once they start to see it consistently as part of the routine, it's like they have to make more of a conscious decision. Like, I am not going to participate in this every single day. And again, just revisiting this idea that like, this is the part of class where we are retrieving, we're acknowledging that we forget, and remembering.
Okay, yeah, correct. Okay, thank you, great.
You're welcome. So again, just as far as resources do go, retrievalpractice.org is a really awesome website. If it feels overwhelming to you, the place that I would start is their teaching tips. They have teaching tips at the top underneath strategies, their weekly teaching tips. And those are just kind of bite size, and you can dig into anything, any like particular topic that you want to look at. They have a bunch of free resources, lots of books and podcasts, and just tons of things. So again, I do not suggest by any means looking at all of these, but if you're like, I am a Facebook learner, maybe Facebook is the thing for you, or I'm on Twitter, I'm just going to take the one step to follow them on Twitter, or I'm just going to subscribe to their email list or something like that. So again, I don't try and do it all, please. But if there's something in here where you're like, that's something I really want to dig into, those are just extra resources. If it's too much, you can just ignore those last few slides. All right.
Kara, what is the, sorry, what is the name? Today we're doing is Power.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you for those of you watching the recording. Please email me if you need anything at all.